Ashwini, can you hear us? You are on mute. We can't hear you if you're talking.
Sorry, come again, please. I didn't get you.
Oh, you are on.
Start. Hello. On behalf of WI Bangalore section, it's a pleasure to have with us today a wonderful set of people to talk more on internet security issues. And without much ado, I call upon Ms. Supriya to tell us more regarding this.
So greetings from IEEE Women in Engineering AG Bangalore section. We are very much excited and thankful to all of you for joining today's session on Zero Trust Security for Enterprises. So this session is being hosted by IEEE Women in Engineering Bangalore team in collaboration with ISC Square Hyderabad team. So before we proceed with the session, we would request all the participants to share their queries in the chat window, and speakers will be taking those queries and any suggestions during the Q&A session. Now I would request IEEE student volunteer Sundar to brief us about the session and our distinguished speakers. Over to you, Sundar.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good evening to one and all present here. So today's session apprises audience on the need to shift from implicit trust to zero trust. It is an introduction to zero trust concepts as a strategic approach for organizations for strengthening their cybersecurity posture amidst highly challenging and changing threat landscape. So the participants will learn how strategic approach to cybersecurity can secure an organization by eliminating implicit trust and continuously validating every stage of digital interaction. So let's just take a look about our speakers. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Madhu Bhimavarapu. He is the Vice President, Core Technology Infrastructure at Bank of America. So he's a global technology leader, driving large-scale technology transformation through hybrid cloud adoption, infrastructure automation, and service digitization with a goal towards zero-touch provisioning of infrastructure at scale. With 24 plus years of experience in building cloud platforms, network automation, security engineering, and operations, he is a CISSP and Zero Trust Security Certified Professional, also founding president of ISC Square Hyderabad chapter, and has 3 US patents filed and 1 which is granted. I would also like to invite Mrs. H Latha, Information Security Consultant at CISSP. She has 25 plus years experience in the banking sector with domain experience varying from general banking, IT application implementation, maintenance, migration to core banking, and ATM reconciliation. She's really passionate about security and multiple years of experience in the field of information security and risk management for ISMS consultation and IT audits. She's also a CISA and CISSP certified security professional and also a founder member of ISC Square Hyderabad chapter and the director of training. She is one of the active members in conducting PDM sessions and other security awareness programs. Before I hand over the session to our distinguished speakers, I just wanted to let you know that Mrs. Ashwini Hola is the moderator for the Q&A sessions. So I'd like to give it over to the distinguished speakers.
All right. Very good afternoon.
Well, just a note for regarding housekeeping. So we would really appreciate if you have any queries, please post them in your chat windows, and we can certainly take it up after the talk, or rather whenever the speakers feel like taking up the questions. And you're more than welcome to share your experiences as well. You can use the chat window as well as the icon for raising your hands. So thank you so much. And at the outset, I was a little, kind of jinxed. So wishing everybody in the session a happy Mother's Day as well. So over to you, Madhu.
Excellent. Thank you, Ashwini. I was about to say that very good afternoon, everyone. Taking time off on a pleasant Sunday, at least in Hyderabad. Not that hot, or it's cloudy actually today, so it might rain shortly. So to all mothers, very happy Mother's Day. Not just today, of course. Every day is a Mother's Day for me. Good, and thanks for those wonderful introductions. We will kickstart. We are almost 8 minutes into the session. We plan for about 45 minutes of discussion and plenty of time for question and answers. We have Latha as well to kickstart the session. Latha, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Madhu. Thanks a lot. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Next one, the starting slide on zero trust definition. Okay. Yeah, we'll stop here. So good evening, everybody. We'll start straight into the zero trust. You can see the definition on screen. Before we really get into the definition, we would like to give an introduction about what this zero trust is all about and what actually made this concept to evolve. Today, this is one of the most important strategic concepts for cybersecurity. So how it has developed. Now, the thing is, what was the IT environment? The first thing is zero trust is a strategic approach for securing your IT enterprises, right? Now, what was the reason? Earlier, we had the IT infrastructure, okay, and the way it was organized earlier, and today it is how it is. There is a lot of difference. The complexities in technologies, you see, the way the business is organized and the size, the way the size of the organization has grown, all this has contributed to a need for a new kind of concepts. Now, the technologies, how it has changed, like business organizations, how it has changed. We can see like the resources the organization enterprise is using, the IT resources enterprise is using, no more on purely on enterprise infrastructure. They can be on some other infrastructure, like the way we are using the cloud services. And earlier we were using IT resources of an enterprise from enterprise network. Today, the remote users, mobile users, as well as the branch offices, they use their own networks, local networks, and then access the enterprise resources. So this is another change. And another thing is, even if you are using your own resources, it is not going to be on your own infrastructure. And sometimes the infrastructure is not yours and the resources also not yours, like SaaS offerings. But still, your enterprise users are going to access those resources. So now the protection, earlier we have the physical boundaries of your enterprise. Today, each enterprise has got so many internal networks and also the satellite networks. Given this scenario, what has changed? The earlier the perimeter concept got diluted now. You don't have that kind of strict perimeter, and the kind of focus earlier people had on securing the perimeter, that also lost significance now. Because when there is no perimeter concept in the present organization, the question of focusing for security and perimeter also lost its ground. Then second, another thing is, you have that trust imposed earlier within the organization. The belief was that whatever is within the enterprise network can be trusted. There is no threat from that. The threat has always come from the external environment. This was the belief. But today, when perimeter itself doesn't exist, that also that has no value. At the same time, it was also a known fact that the threats and attacks were more from internal than the external environment. So that means our focusing on perimeter has never helped us to combat the threat from the internal lateral movement of the threats. So this is another aspect which people had to recognize and work for it. Well, another reason, right? Then when we consider all these things, now perimeter doesn't exist. So intrinsic trust that was imposed upon the internal network also, it doesn't exist, and it should not be there anymore. And the resources, since your resources are not on your own infrastructure, so you cannot trust, there cannot be an inherent trust in your own resources as well. Then another thing, the kind of dynamism that the IT environment has got, and the way the IT cyber threat landscape is changing, You cannot have static and single model defense systems that were existing earlier. You have to even your organization is dynamic, the IT environment is getting dynamic, and the resources are changing every day. Obviously, your security strategies should also be changing, and the way you allow the access to your resources should also be changing. So this dynamism has to be there. And another thing, the staticness doesn't help, because every minute the security posture of a system, be it on the resource side or on the asset side, it will change. So there has to be the same kind of dynamism in approving those access decisions. So these are all the things that have contributed for the development of zero trust concept. I think around 2 decades ago, if you see, 2 decades ago it started, but there was no word for like zero trust. But the Jericho Forum as well as Black Core was from DoD. Yeah, it was from DoD. These are the major publications which has focused on, one is the deperimeterization, I mean, moving away from perimeter focused security, and access the decisions based on per transaction. The reason per transaction is it cannot be one single permission which can have access to all the resources. That's how we used to work earlier. You give your credential, you are authorized, your privileges are verified, and then you are free in the network, your internal network, you can access any resource. But today it is not the situation. That resource, that access should be per transaction basis for a particular resource. If you want it again, it has to be revalidated. And another thing, the Jericho Forum also, it has also focused upon deperimeterization. Also, it says that single static way of authorizing the access, making the access decisions, or the building the security is not going to help. So ultimately, all this affect to the same thing. Like, there is no perimeter concept, and there is no implicit trust imposed either on the network or on the resources, the enterprise resources. And every access has to be verified, authenticated, and evaluated against many parameters before it is allowed to access one particular resource with the least privilege option. This is about, now if you see the definition with this background, you can see a collection of concepts and ideas designed to minimize uncertainty in enforcing accurate least privilege per request access decisions in information systems and services in the face of network viewed as compromised. Now, you see the last thing, network viewed as compromised. That shows no more your internal network, you are considering it as your own, as something you can trust. You already have an assumption that it is compromised. So whether it is internal or external, you are going to be evaluated with a set of parameters. That is the thing this definition says. And the zero trust architecture, whichever uses the ideas and concept of zero trust, whatever we have discussed now, and we will be discussing more on that, that will be your zero trust architecture. It has got some logical components as well. And when we go on to zero trust enterprise, any enterprise which will use this zero trust architecture is your zero trust enterprise. Now, what is important to say is, what are those principles, what are the assumptions, and what are the logical components that here, before I think Madhu can explain that part. Before that, I'll just explain this picture. Can you see the logical components is policy decision and policy engine and policy administrator, and then there is a policy enforcement point. We will discuss about it later. Here in this picture, I want to focus on one thing. Can you see that implicit trust zone on the right side? Earlier, I was just mentioning there is no perimeter concept. There is no implicit trust imposed upon the internal network. Okay, then what is this implicit trust zone I am talking about? It is not that there is a space which you have demarcated for implicit trust zone. It is a zone which an asset, when it sends an access request, that will attain a status after going through certain validations and evaluations. It will reach a status where that is called implicit trust zone. So when it reaches that particular area, there is no more validation, no more evaluation. It can reach the resource. When I say resource, I'll also want to add here one thing. All the assets in an enterprise are considered as a resource. This is another very important point in zero trust concept, because even my laptop, if I'm allowed to access my enterprise resources, the laptop also, my personal laptop will become a resource for the enterprise, because any data and data source will be the resource for enterprise. Keeping this in mind, we will now see what are all the logical concepts, what are all the principles on which zero trust is based, what are the assumptions that zero trust makes. These things we will see before we move on to the architectures. Madhu, can you have a...
Okay. Yeah, so simply put, implicit trust versus no trust. I think that's what we're talking about, and that's the entire concept of zero trust. Implicit trust between resources right side. Today, when I log on to my company, and all of you work for companies, I assume, or your home network, as an example. If you log in to a network, you can look at other resources. I can access SharePoints, my intranet portals, and applications like HR applications, email, whatnot, all other, all other default given access, right? When you join a company, all of them are open all the time, 24/7, 365 days. You are, as long as you work for the company. With zero trust, this becomes very close to the policy decisioning and enforcement engine, which is the brain and heart of the zero trust model architecture, will become very close to these resources. And when I say close, it becomes granular. I think it's, as per the definition, granular meaning it will dissect who, where, what, when, how they are accessing. And that access is given only for that time frame where I need access to that, where I'm working on something. Beyond that, it will not. It can be time bound, it can be location bound, it can be user bound, or elevation of privileges bound, or so many things that comes into picture. So we'll look a bit more deeper into that trust engine or trust algorithm a little later. But before going there, zero trust evolved with some assumptions. All of this can happen only if we approach this with certain assumptions. What are those assumptions? Some Latha has already mentioned earlier. Entire enterprise private network is not considered an implicit trust zone. So for all purposes, whether it is intranet or extranet, right, internet rather, both are same as far as any resource is concerned. So you treat everything, anything that's coming from anywhere, whether it is inside, outside, is considered untrusted. And what does it mean when it's, the enterprise network? What is the meaning of enterprise network? It's probably a logical segregation, dedicated bandwidth, giving or connecting devices, connecting resources rather. Devices on the network may not be owned. Today, of course, bring your own device. Everybody, most of the companies are allowing. So those devices are not owned by enterprise. So not all devices are owned by enterprise. That's fundamental assumption. No resource is inherently trusted. Just because I am on the network, or a printer that is inside the network that is connected to my intranet, will I trust it? Will I give every access to that printer? Well, not. That's one of the fundamental assumptions as part of zero trust. Again, resources may not be enterprise owned. Some of them may be, a company may have outsourced their HR applications, or like Workday is hosted on your cloud environment. So then that's managed and maintained by the vendor. And like that, there are so many SaaS-based applications that the enterprise doesn't own, but using. Remote subjects and assets cannot be trusted. Cannot trust their own networks. Like in the example, if a service is provided by a vendor, and that service is coming through an application, and that application is hosted somewhere else on the vendor's premise or on a cloud, that network that it hosts, obviously, for the company, whoever is implementing zero trust, if they themselves don't trust their own network, they cannot trust someone else's network where the application or the service is hosted. Again, the transactions or the movements, communication between within the network and outside the enterprise, within the enterprise and outside the enterprise. The security policies need to be consistent all the time. Now, all of these will, boils down to 7 tenets that zero trust was built upon over a period of last 20 plus odd years. Again, all communication must be secure. Data at rest, data in transit. All data sources and computing services are considered resources, no matter whether it is inside the network that we own, the IP address block that we own as a company, whether the resources are part of that IP address block or outside, doesn't matter. The enterprise collects as much information as possible. Everything and anything that's deemed critical for the enterprise is monitored all the time, 24/7, in an attempt to establish, any investigations for future, breaches for future investigations, right? And improving the performance of your security posture. So continuous monitoring is paramount. Monitoring of all assets, whether they are up to the N+1 or N+2 or N-1 and N-2, whatever the enterprises use in terms of patching, in terms of keeping their assets up to date. Dynamic policy, again, related to the trust engine. Access is not transient, access is not permanent. All resource authentication and authorization are dynamic and strictly enforced before access is allowed. That's where the PEP, the policy enforcement point in the framework of the policy engine will determine. Access to individual resources is granted on a per session basis. Again, these sessions are established through the policy enforcement point once the trust engine says yes or no based on so many attributes that we are talking about, and we'll look a bit more deeper into these, what those attributes are. So let's jump into what those, how these tenets and assumptions translate into something actionable based on the zero trust model. So again, some of these, the network requirements, whatever that I mentioned, to make them possible, we need few things. All of the assets, the basics, right? All of the assets need to be connected and accessible. And I need to know as a company which of the assets that I own, which I don't own, and whether I'm managing their status or not, security or not. Again, these are, I'm just browsing through the data plane and control plane. We talk about it in a minute on what they mean. Where the decisions are made, whether access need to be given versus enforcing that decision, how long that access is given, differentiates the data plane and control plane. The assets can reach the policy enforcement point. So some of these assumptions, some of these network requirements are foundational to implement zero trust. So we'll get back to these requirements if there are any questions. More important, we want to see what are the core components that form the zero trust model or the architecture. Over to you, Latha.
Yeah, fine. This, if you see this core components, they're basically not that of a particular physical device. There can be one hardware where all this can be clubbed, or there can be one logical component but two devices, right? It can be vice versa. There is no strict thing that this is quality, PA is one thing, PA, it is not like that. They are only logical components. If you see policy engine, what actually policy engine does when it receives the access request will never come to this directly. It will come through policy administrator. When it reaches policy engine, what it does, It takes that access request and evaluates based upon the inputs it gets from different things. I don't know whether that slide is there, but actually it gets its inputs from one is CDM, that is continuous diagnosing and mitigating. You know that, like, this is a process which it collects information about all the devices, its status, security posture of the device, what is the health condition, its operating system version, its patch, whether it's patched properly, what are the whether it is any vulnerabilities exist. This kind of information about the asset which is making the access, that will be provided by this CDM. Then there is one compliance. This compliance part is the very first thing that policy engine takes is from enterprise policy itself. I'm sorry, I forgot. Enterprise policy is one thing which is the input for making a decision, right? So first it takes the enterprise policy, then it takes the compliance. Every enterprise, it has to comply with certain regulations, okay, certain legislations. Those things should also be considered before you allow an access. If you allow an access or disallow an access, for both of them, you need to have that information. Again, identity management. You all know what is identity management about the user, the subject. The subject can be an user, a human user, or an application that is using. So you need to have information about that particular subject and credentials. It's the privileges that are allowed to that, what resources it can access. This information it gets from identity management. And enterprise PKI, you all know that you have your certificates for encryption to maintain the confidentiality and reputation and all those things. That enterprise PKI is there. Those certificates will also be validated here. Then access controls. That access controls. So what are all the things you need to each resource, the information about the resource access controls. Taking all this information, policy engine puts it into a trust algorithm. This trust algorithm, evaluating all this input, it will give a confidence level for this access request. If it's okay, then it will be permitted. The decision is conveyed to policy administrator. The job of policy administrator is to provide that communication. If the access request is approved by the policy engine, policy administrator will give some configuration. The configuration might involve the IP address, the ports of the resources, or the session key required for that communication. Then taking this input, the PEP, this is what we call policy enforcement point. This is also called a gateway. This will create a communication channel between the end device, the subject device, and the gateway. Through this communication channel, the communication will start, and this gateway, it will also act as a proxy for the resource. This is what about the components of this. Remember one thing in all this, the policy engine and policy administrator, they always interact on a different plane. It will not be clubbed with the data plane. Earlier, Madhu was talking about data plane and control plane, because the PE and PA, that means policy engine, policy administrators, are the controlling devices. They're only making that control decisions. So they interact with each other on a control plane, which will not be clubbed with the data plane. Once that policy administrator convey the message to the execution point, enforcement point, then in the data plane, the communication channel will be established where the encrypted data will flow through to the permitted resource, right? Another very, very important point that you remember here, in the earlier networks, once you reach any gateway, once you are inside a network, all the resources you could access here. This gateway, it will be resource wise, and sometimes it will be grouped. How it works, we'll see the next. Can we have the next slide? So in 1 minute, I'll have a review of what we have come across till now. the perimeter concept is not valid anymore. There is no implicit trust. Everybody, whether you are inside the organization or outside the network of the organization, whether your resources are on the enterprise network or in a cloud or somebody else's infrastructure, you are accessing sitting inside your office, or you are accessing from your home or from some other branch office, everything is secured and no resource is trusted, or even your enterprise network is not trusted, and the access is permitted based on the evaluation of each and every access per transaction basis. And earlier we used to give one password, and then you are authenticated and you are authorized to access so many resources. That is not allowed now. Keep this in mind now. And also there are three components which will execute this zero trust concept in toto, that is policy engine, policy administrator, and policy enforcement point. These three also you remember, because then only you will be able to follow the next part of it, and very important part. Next, Madhu, next slide, please.
Yeah, so we'll jump into the architectural, how we are implementing zero trust.
Yes, we are jumping into that. Okay.
So before jumping into the deployment scenarios and depending on organizational requirements, just a note: control plane and data plane. Latha mentioned these are logical components and how they are connected, right? Some of the network requirements we have seen earlier, the resources, the enterprise resources, of course, need to be reachable, and reachable through the PEP, policy enforcement point only, for the regular transactional purposes. They are also reachable by the policy administrator or policy engine for configuration purpose, right? Maintenance purpose. All these resources need to be, we need to make sure that they are, their security posture is up to date and, and configured properly, right? And the posture may be changing based on the other inputs that the trust engine or the policy engine determines based on the threat landscape that might be changing in real time. And based on that, the resource or asset configuration need to be changed in real time. So for that reason, the access to these resources need to be segregated between the control plane and data plane. So access to, again, control plane by any actors, like whether they are employees who are supporting the system or people outside the organization, the threat actors rather, they should not be reachable. They have the access to those, the authentication, the authorization need to be tightly controlled, given to very few people. Right, and it should be implemented. Again, the same logic applies in terms of per session basis access. It's not based on the attributes like the location, the device that the employee is using, even for this control plane. It's like elevated access, right? So just wanted to touch that point. So let's look at how.
Before we go, this control plane importance is, this is a single point disruption. If PEP is single point, disruption of the things, this can be disastrous, because this PE is making all policy access decisions, right? If you tamper with that, if somebody does any mischief with that, then the whole architecture will be failing and your enterprise will be failing. That is the reason that is under a separate plane, where the access is completely rigid and restricted to the very few people, and with extremely complex access systems.
Yeah.
So we'll do that architecture now.
So we'll look at how these three components, policy engine, policy administrator, and the enforcement point, how the combination of these, where to deploy, whether it is a hardware appliance, software appliance, whether it is resides in cloud or internal to the company, internal to the network, So all of that we'll see what options or what possibilities we have. So let me want to take over. Yep.
Yes. So why we say variations? Because zero trust concept is a set of ideas and concepts and techniques, right? So it is not one night makeover. You have to understand your organization. You have to understand these logical components and the principles of zero trust concept, where how they fit in. Accordingly, you just can't put all the three together and say I am zero trust. It doesn't work that way. So based on your organization requirement, your workflows, your resources, the way infrastructure is organized, there are three approaches to go for zero trust architecture. One is enhance, where the difference occurs is the way all the tenets are used, but they focus on a particular principle. If there are 7 principles, all 7 may be there, but the focus will be more on 1 or 2 or 3. It depends. That is one thing. And how the logical components are used is another variation. Now see the enhanced identity governance, as the name suggests. In this part of in this kind of approach, what the focus is on identity management system, because an identity management system, and you will have a policy enforcement point. The reason why the focus is on identity management, not on PA and PA, is something like, let us assume that you have a SaaS offering. One example I'm giving. In that SaaS offering, what happens, I'm talking about cloud infrastructure as service and platform as service and software as service. In software as service model, your enterprise will not have much control over any control over the infrastructure on which this application works, right? There you cannot have your own PE and PA to evaluate the access. There you are going to have your gateway only. You are going to depend on gateway. So it is very, very necessary for you to strengthen your identity management system as well, because you are not having that access to PA and PA part. That's where this approach is used. And the second is, and another area where this is used is when open networks. If some enterprise, if visitors and people with outsiders are accessing the network enterprises more, there also you need to have this enhanced identity governance, right? Then micro segmentation. This micro segmentation, here what happens, you can use your switches, routers, the next generation firewalls, and some special purpose devices in front of the resources, and you can have a firewall on device side or a software agent also. What happens, how it works here is, this particular agent on device, it will provide visibility about the accessing device. Device, when I say device, that is a subject which is making an access request. This has to be, this will have an agent which will talk to the PE, that PEP, that is policy enforcement point, where you are putting, that is the switch or router, whatever. Behind that, the resources will be there. And this is micro segmentation. You are using a network device there, right? And you can have an agent. In software defined and intent-based networking, here what happens, you are using software components in place of hardware network devices. Okay, when actually, if you just want to understand, here also you have a gateway. Here also you can have device-based clients, a software clients. Micro segmentation also, I said the same thing. You have a gateway in front of the resources, and software-defined perimeters also work same way. But the difference comes if you are having your resources in the cloud, how you are going to access. That is where you are using the software defined networking concept to gain access to cloud-based services, right? That is one thing. Micro-segmentation, as you said, if you are on premises, where you have your resources on premises and you have to access, and your own enterprise assets are going to access, you can have asset side client, and the main PEP will be acting as a gateway, and then PA will anyway be there. That is micro segmentation will suit well in that kind of environment. Now, how, let us see This is only abstract model. I'm saying there can be a PE that if you actually transform it into deployment, how you can deploy. The first is device agent and gateway based. The name itself says, earlier I was telling, you will have PEP component working as a, I said PEP is policy enforcement point. It will act as a gateway also, gateway for accessing the resource, and this gateway will be mediating with the policy administrator also. I am repeating these things because this will flow throughout the architecture. Now, in this device agent concept, accessing device, there will be an agent. This agent will provide visibility on the system. Visibility in the sense it gives entire information about the status, security status of the system. So the gateway, what happens? First, this device will send a request to the policy administrator. Policy administrator will send it to PE. PE will analyze, evaluate, and then based on the trust algorithm result, the confidence level it gains, it will allow that. If it allows, then it will give to policy administrator, which will provide that configuration for communication, and the information will be given to policy enforcement point, that is gateway, which will create that communication channel, and the subject will start accessing the resource. Then, okay, in this, remember one thing, device is there, gateway is there. Another important point you have to remember is, here gateway will be gateway for only one resource. Remember this. Now, when you come to enclave based, the only difference between device based, device agent gateway based and enclave based is that everything is same, but in enclave based, the gateway is not in front of one resource. It is actually on the boundaries of a set of resources, right? Then why earlier we had one resource, why here set of resources? The earlier concept is where your resource, if it is a resource which can have an API to connect with the proxy, then you will have one resource. Okay, let us say a crucial application. Everybody can on the network cannot even go to that, forget about entering it. Then if that has the capability of talking to the proxy with an API, then you will have the first model. The second model comes, let us say you have some legacy applications. One aspect, the legacy application, legacy database, legacy application, they will not have APIs individually to talk to this. Then you don't need, there now and then they'll be accessed. There you group the resources, and you will have one proxy for a set of resources. Another use case is like you have similar business function application with similar business functions. Maybe for redundancy purpose, you have same application 10, 12 servers. Then you can club them into one enclave. At the boundary, you will keep the gateway. Rest of the thing will work the way I explained in the first part. Clear? Then coming to resource bottlenecks. Another first two. Now remember the first two. I have already made it clear when how they are different and when they are used. You come to the third point. The difference here is in the first two, there is an agent, right, on the device side. In the third, we don't talk about device agent. The reason is in the first two, we are talking about enterprise owned resources. If the device accessing this subject, the device is provided by the enterprise can have a control over it and it will place a client. But if you talk about non-enterprise resources and personal computers, now which can the enterprise cannot put their own client in that. You know, BYOD policies, you bring your own device, but the enterprise cannot control it. So there is no device side client. Every device can go to that proxy or the gateway or the PEP. Their PEP will send it to PA, and then PA will send it to the process is same. The difference here is earlier you were having visibility about the system. So it will go to PA, PA will see, and if the system is not bad, it will not even come to gateway. But here there is no option. You are not getting that visibility about the health of the accessing device. It will anyway go to gateway. The only threat here is before it to get evaluated also, it is being allowed into the network, at least up to the gateway. So if an attacker knows that this is the gateway, because it is already allowed up till that point, they can go for denial of service attacks. This is one backdrop in this particular deployment. But you cannot escape when the device accessing device is not in your control, right? Then device,
Latha,
yeah,
maybe we'll fast track a bit.
yeah. I think it's over now.
Yeah, so the last one on the sandboxing, once you complete.
Right. That will be over. The device application sandboxing is that you are not having a client, but still, let us assume that your laptop, they want to download some application. They can download some vetted application, and through which they can access the resource. So this will help to some extent, even if you don't have visibility, even if you don't have control over the system as such, but the application is vetted, it is secure. Even if my laptop gets compromised, but this vetted application which is within a sandboxing, this will only access the resource, otherwise it will not be allowed. So this is about the deployment models.
Yeah, so any company will have multiple scenarios, and whatever listed there, I think applies to any medium to large size companies. We'll have branch offices, head office and branch offices. Workloads may be present on single cloud, internal cloud, public cloud, or multiple public clouds. Companies will have contractors engaged with vendors, definitely other partnership with other companies, and services or the applications that are facing the public or the customer facing services apps, right? So considerations on how you want to deploy zero trust in these scenarios, and details are available on the NIST publication, and the link was given at the top, or you can simply Google that as well. You will get the details on how you can deploy for a specific scenario. Moving on. So once, some of the examples, how zero trust is going to help. So this is one example. If I quickly walk you through, assuming that there are compromised credentials, right? Whether it is a normal application user or application admin support or infrastructure admin support, or somebody in the enterprise having access to the network with credentials, if they are compromised, which is a normal scenario that we see nowadays, right? A lot of breaches are happening with social engineering. The attackers are getting access to the credentials, and they are accessing enterprise resources, for whatever the purpose. So what happens if an threat actor, gets these credentials? Initially, if the credentials are stolen and the threat actor is accessing the system, enterprise network or a resource through the users, the employees' system, obviously it is the system is trusted, the device is trusted, the credentials are trusted, known to the enterprise, hence the access is allowed. You cannot stop it because both the device and the employee. But if you implement a trust algorithm with contextual or behavioral aspects into the trust engine, to some extent this might be mitigated, but initial access will be allowed. Once the employee is inside or the threat actor is inside the network or inside the accessing the resource rather, any sideways movements, the request for sideways movements in terms of accessing other resources goes back to the policy engine or trust engine, which will be blocked because the user itself does not have authorization to access those resources. Or if the threat actor tries to access the resources through their own device, which is usually the case, right? Once the credentials are stolen, most of the times the accessing the resources by threat actor happens through some other resource, some other IP address, some other region altogether. So things change. So based on these parameters, the zero trust engine will itself block that request. So a simple example on how the zero trust in action will help in terms of compromised credentials. And of course, the key thing is logging all the actions that are happening in the environment for improving the security posture and reducing or eliminating the risks associated in future breaches or attacks.
Here I would interrupt. This logging is part of is one of the data source for policy engine.
Policy
Logging.
engine, yes, absolutely.
From logging, it will take to SIM. Both will be sending its inputs to policy engine. Based on that, it will change the access. Parameters to evaluate access decisions. So
Yep.
they're all part of that.
So quickly look at zero trust will not eliminate risk. It certainly reduces to the great extent. What are possible residual risk that you might have even after implementing zero trust, right? Subversion of the decisioning process, the policy engine, policy administration.
PRPA, right?
Yeah, the PA and PE, right? Obviously, accessing those by the attacker is compromising the brain. Yeah, right. You're saying something, Latha?
That is about PA and PA, denial of service
Right.
network. Here we were talking.
Yeah, so these are common. Whatever that we employ today for denial of service, right? Distributed denial of service, what we do is exactly what we need to do for the PEP and PA and PE as well. And few other scenarios, which are common scenarios, which might still exist in, despite deploying zero trust, and how you can reduce the risk by employing high availability, multi-factor authentication, the monitoring and analytics, the telemetry data that you want to feed back into the trust engine. So all those things you will, if you deploy them, the risk will be reduced. I wanted to ask the question, but given the time, we only have 6 minutes. But this question is to ponder over for you. If a supply chain, and this happened very recently, right, last year, in Q3 of last year, supply chain was compromised and some ransomware was injected into one of the softwares, and software was downloaded by hundreds of companies because it's a trusted company, and the malicious actors are started exploiting the situation, right? So how does zero trust address this supply chain issue? Anyway, this is for you to ponder over. We can offline discuss. If you have any thoughts around it, just ping us. There are resources mentioned towards the end of the presentation on how to reach us. So how do we start adopting, right? Pure zero trust is utopia. It doesn't exist. It's like, everybody wants it. But they already have a perimeter-based network today, so they need to transition from perimeter-based network to a zero trust. And how do we start there? There are approaches on how to start, where to start. We strongly recommend to go through the the original NIST publication on where you can start. But to give you a gist, right? The good beginning is to know what we have today in terms of data, whether our data is classified, and in terms of classification, confidential, proprietary, public, and all that, right? How much of data is classified? Where are our workloads, public, internal, external? How much of automation we have today? How much of monitoring is happening, logging happening? Do we have centralized logging for all the actions like syslogs or whatnot? And are we looking at that data today? Do we know how the data is flowing through our processes, right? The workflows that happen in the enterprise. So it gives you a foundation, and then you can put some maturity score on each of these against zero trust goals. If zero trust, if you rate 10 as the pure zero trust, once you assess, you can put each one of them as 0, 1, 2, 3, wherever they are, and then you can derive a plan on an approach to reach that 10 for each of that. So it's a simple, 1 minute explanation on where to start, but just wanted to leave some time for question and answers as well. I know there are a couple of questions. We'll go there. So metrics we don't need to talk about. These are again tells us whether we are in the right direction when we are implementing zero trust, leading, lagging metrics, strategic and operational metrics. Yeah.
How to verify our is how effective zero trust concept that architecture is to verify this metrics will help. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are a few questions. Ashwini, you want to
Yeah.
share the questions?
So,
I can't
yes,
see properly.
yeah, I just went through all of them, and Suman Shastri has a question. I've asked him to elaborate on that. So meanwhile, I would like you people to just have a look at one particular question, probably the second one. Just a minute, please. Sorry. I'm sorry, I'm
Go ahead.
audible, I hope. So
Yes,
do
you are.
existing, this is a question from Supriya. Do existing tools, for example, IAM, need to be redesigned to comply with zero trust?
Okay, Madhu, I'll take this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, see, IAM, you are not redesigning. Actually, IAM provides data inputs through the policy engine. Okay, it will take, IAM is nothing but the users are identified who is accessing what are the, you are giving the your credentials, your privileges to access, all those things are maintained in the IAM. And this inputs will be taken by PE whenever you access for a resource. Based on this, access decision is made apart from taking from other resources. That's all. It is not about redesigning. But yes, if you are going for the first model, then your IAM has to be strengthened. Maybe you have to take more parameters that are possible in your IAM. Can that answer your question? Who's that? I don't know who is asking.
Supriya?
Yes,
Is that
Latha.
clear?
Yes, Latha. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
And
Supriya, now that you're, I mean, you have unmuted yourself, the second question also is by you. So probably you can ask it yourself.
So, yeah, I think we have few more questions. Maybe I'll go next.
Okay.
In
So
our
what are the device identity management mechanisms in the zero trust? I think Murli was the one who asked this question.
Madhu, you want to answer or shall I go ahead?
yeah, so first of all, there are proprietary technologies available. One of the things that I can talk about is, MAC address. MAC address binding is key for anything that is accessing any network. So for an enterprise to know what assets, devices, resources that I have, I should be maintaining a list of or inventory of those devices. And MAC address is key for those. In addition to that, obviously the devices will have their own identity. In terms of accessing or granting access through, if an enterprise deployed an Active Directory, right? For example, to manage, to give access to these resources. Either it is role-based access or attribute-based access. So the device identities need to be maintained, and the vendors that offer these, and there are quite a few proprietary technologies as well. I can share that with you offline, but not on this call. What options we have as part of Zero Trust. A couple of vendors that I know of.
And another thing to add here is device management is specifically used in Zero Trust to, as we already said, the first step is to know what you have, all your devices, your resources and all. So that's where your device management starts. And it is very important if you are going to use that agent client in almost most of the deployments will be with a client and the device. If you don't know what are your devices, if you are not going to have any such system to manage them, how are you going to ensure that all of them have the clients? That is the importance of device management in a Zero Trust architecture.
Another interesting question is there
Yeah.
from, was it Supriya, I think? Yeah. On the enterprise, in the remote working setup, enterprises provide VPN. To what extent VPN can comply with Zero Trust? So in the context of VPN, I think VPN comes with perimeter-based security. With zero trust, we are talking about there is no perimeter. So as long as the enterprise knows what device is coming, who is accessing, and whether they are authorized to access, and that device is authorized to access, and based on other behavioral and contextual based parameters and values, the policy engine will give access. So there will be, in a pure zero trust environment, there is no concept of VPN. You want to add anything, Latha, to that?
Yeah, actually, the very reason we are going for a zero trust is in VPN, every device will reach up to VPN. That means you are allowing network access to it. But here we are, what the zero trust is expecting you to do, you put a client there. If that system has got a client, then only it should come up to that gateway to enter the network. Otherwise, it is not even entering data network. You remember I said the access request will go to PA, not to the gateway, right? Control panel and data panel. That's how it is linked. So VPN, again, you are allowing the network. That is not what zero trust wants. If you want to access your clouds, the SaaS services also, I said, no, there you are having a gateway. Through gateway, you are accessing your SaaS services.
Okay. Few more questions. I know we are 4 minutes past, but there are quite a few questions.
Madhu, this is something really good that we are having questions. So please don't, unless you're really pressed for time, I would rather you take some time to actually address these questions,
Yeah.
please. So,
I think we can.
So you can read the next question, please,
Yeah.
or shall I?
In fact, I'll go to the top. We missed the one that Sumant was asking.
No, he's not yet elaborated. So the context
Okay.
of the first question is not yet elaborated. Probably, you can take it up a little later.
Okay,
So
fine.
Arka has a question which is very, very, like vague, but still maybe you could address that regarding projects at undergraduate level that can be done with respect to zero trust model, because that would be a nice place to start, and people could get much more.
What undergrad level that can be done with respect to the Rohit Goel would assess for conflict.
So
Yeah.
I'll take a shot, Latha, you can add. The market is evolving today. There are, everybody is claiming they have a zero trust solution. To what extent they will live up to the tenets, the 7 tenets and the assumptions that we made, right? We looked at earlier, is still not established. Market leader in zero trust. So companies also started looking at it. If you look at the history, it is last year only federal government mandated all federal agencies to adopt zero trust. So the landscape of adoption of zero trust is just started. Like the cloud started almost some 15 years back, or more than 12 years back. Zero trust is at that stage. Not that it is like some new earth-shattering concept that companies will adopt. So they already exist, right? Enterprise knows what devices they have. Enterprise do have identity management solutions. Enterprises do have logging, right? Activity logging and all that. Enterprises do have next generation firewalls and all that. So they are there in certain levels of maturity. In terms of specific projects on where to start, I think one area that I personally think is the trust engine. Because of the compute power, imagine a company of 100,000 people, 1 lakh people, right, or employees accessing resources any given day. We require a trust engine that is scalable, that gives responses in milliseconds. So do we have trust engines like that? We don't know today. I still need to go back and check how the Google's BeyondCorp was functioning, the model that they have built using zero trust. So there is still a lot of opportunities. Specific projects, certainly we can come up with. I myself was thinking of designing something for homes where it's like a SD-WAN solution. If people know any networking, software-defined wide area network for your branch offices, you just deploy one box and then you plug it in, it's all done. So something like that. Can we define something for home-based networking where it's zero trust. People cannot access. My Wi-Fi might be open for right now, for all purposes, might be open for all. But with that box, with that solution, maybe a cloud-based solution, it should be okay. It should be okay for, there are a lot of opportunities. It's just the, sky is the limit for that, actually. You can imagine the components, right? While PAP and PET are the three components, the interoperability between the other, the extended components for zero trust is still evolving, landscape out there. So I know there is not a clear-cut project or anything I can say, but opportunity exists. So just ping offline or send out a note. We'll certainly engage in one of those projects that we want to take up in the near future. The next one would SSO.
It's a highly subjective
Actually,
kind of a thing, and for a very vast and vast thing, like area, you'll have to take it case by case. That's right. So Rohit has something interesting here. Would SSO conflict the zero trust idea? And as you authenticate once and access multiple resources, but the zero trust needs enforcing trust for each transaction.
yeah. See, SSO again, it is only authentication based on your credentials, right? Zero trust in the beginning, we said we are not, zero trust will not depend on any single static evaluation method, right? Defense system. So if you have an SSO, that is through that, if you are sending your credential and all, that input will go to policy engine apart from other data requirements to be. So it can be one part of it. And this SSO again in certain implementations, it will be connected to your IAM, correct? So IAM is again giving inputs to PE. It is the integration of the existing systems. And here I want to add one more thing, device management system. Though it is only for device management system, you are using Mac. But if you are putting it into zero trust, you cannot depend on Mac. One important point here is you have to identify and enroll the device based on something you cannot modify. Mac can be spoofed, right? This also only for device management purpose you can take, but to enroll it into the for making any access, that should be able to provide something, some credential which cannot be modified or spoofed. Another aspect I just wanted to make clear. SSO, I think it is clear. It is like the way you are having device management systems, identity management systems, all are going to provide the inputs to PE. That's all.
Yeah, it can coexist, but the decision to give access to the asset or the resource depends on PE, whether you are authenticated through SSO or some other, mechanism.
It is only a small part of your entire process of following your decision, because it is checking your device status, your earlier behavior, your logs that are going to SIM, because it is giving some information about your the subject device. It will take that also into the CDM is going to give some information, and your compliance thing is going to give some information. Your enforcement enterprise policy is going to give some information. So your authentication credentials also a part of it.
All right, so I know there are no more questions. If there are any questions, you can shoot out to Ashwini, and you have other contact information there certainly, or you can reach out to the ISC Square Hyderabad chapter. We have LinkedIn, we have a web page as well, very brand new web page and brand new LinkedIn sites. Very recently, we are still in the chartering phase. By end of May, we will be official chapter of ISC Square. So hope we'll see all of you to be the members of Hyderabad chapter. And again, it's actually a wonderful session. We have seen quite a few questions. Very thrilled to see those questions, and it started generating our own thinking inside how to come up with those projects. Right? Thank you for asking those questions. Thank you, Ashwini. Back to you.
It's been great. So just a small request to Latha and Madhu both. Can you just drop in the contact contact set of people or yourself that people can reach out to? I see two very inquisitive people here. Probably Arka and Rohit can, and the others as
Sure,
well
sure.
can benefit from it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Sundar, over to you.
That was a wonderful session.
Well,
So I'd like to thank the speakers, both Madhu sir as well as Latha ma'am, for the wonderful explanation and in detailed explanation and taking up the questions. Over to you, ma'am.
yeah. So, well, it's been a great session. Thank you so much to both the speakers. So, well,
All right.
kindly accept this token of appreciation, an e-memento from our side. And Sundar, the next slide, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, Miss Lata, you too. It's been, like you've been so patient and, like supercharged and going about all the questions, answering them so diligently. Thank you so much. I, Ashwini Holla, Vice Chair of Women in Engineering Bangalore section, take this opportunity to place on record our gratitude to all the people today who made this event possible. Primarily, our chair, IEEE Bangalore section, Professor Deepa Shenoy, and chair of Women in Engineering Bangalore section, Dr. Kumudini, for both your support as well as, uh, like being a driving force and taking this ahead. Many thanks. Today's stars have been Mr. Madhu and Ms. Lata. Mr. Madhu, Vice President, Core Technology Infrastructure, Bank of America, President of IAC2, and Ms. Lata Ji, Information Security Consultant at CISSP ISO 27001 standards, who so nicely explained the context and educated us regarding some strategic approaches to cybersecurity that can secure an enterprise or organization by eliminating implicit trust and continuously validating at every stage of digital interaction, and the policy engine, policy enforcement point, and policy admin point. Thank you so much. You've been unhurried in your explanation, at the same time constantly keeping a look on the clock. So it's been wonderful. The participants also have not been passive listeners, but have been active, engaged in the program and made this event successful. Many thanks for your patience and enthusiasm. I would like to place on record my humble thanks to the support from Bangalore section by way of logistics and manpower for organizing the event. Special thanks to the IAC2 Hyderabad chapter for making time for us today. It's much appreciated. Thank you. As a prominent member of IAC2 Hyderabad chapter, Mr. Jasbir has been very generous in his efforts to seamlessly collaborate between IAC2 and WIE team. Many thanks to you. People who've been working in silos, be it student volunteers like Subramanya Navda from SIT Tumkur and Sundar Murthy from IISc, Mr. Changappa, Mr. Kishore Sharma, you've all been very helpful. Most importantly, Ms. Supriya Kamthania, our most valued WIE member in charge of events from HPE, has been the driving force behind making this event possible today by her diligent and tenacious efforts. Wonderful to be having you with us on our team, making such value-added contributions. Thank you so much. On behalf of the organizing team, I would like to wish you all a happy Mother's Day again and happy. Thank you so much. So, well, over to you. And please make note of the contacts that have been dropped in the chat windows, and do reach out and do follow our YouTube channel, wherein this recording would be going up shortly. Thank you so much.
Ashwin, can we take a picture? Maybe if whoever is available, we can come on video.
Come again,
Would request would request participants to, if they can come on video and they can take a picture.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm sorry, a mess of me. Yeah, it would be really great for the sake of posterity as well as, for the records, if you could have your videos rolling on. Please turn your video on.
Maybe stop sharing the screen,
Yeah.
whoever is sharing, Ashwini.
So that maybe you may want to.
Sundar,
Right,
can
yeah,
you
now
stop?
it's on.
Lata, maybe we would request you to come on video as well. Sundar,
Yes, ma'am.
maybe you want to come on video.
Yeah.
This is good enough.
Just hope it's
You don't
Yep.
need yes.
Great. Thanks.
Where is Subhash Sundar?
you can able to capture.
Yeah. Yeah, I have taken. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful Sunday.
Thanks. Thanks a
You
lot.
all.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful session.
Thank you all.
Chandana? Can you just, stop the meeting?